In the late summer of 1942, the lanterns strung outside the compound buzzed faintly in the humid darkness as the clatter of boots on gravel gave way to the hush of nervous anticipation, and inside those stifling walls, Lieutenant Takashiro of the Kempeitai felt the heat rise beneath his collar and the raw scent of sweat and cheap perfume and candle smoke curl around him, thick as fog. He had come expecting another routine inspection, a list in hand, rumours of unrest, the usual complaints of missing rations and medical supplies, but what he found, as the silk screens parted and the hallway filled with muffled laughter, was a scene that would replay itself in his mind with a violence that outstripped any battlefield horror he'd witnessed in the campaign against Changsha. There was a woman singing in a tongue he couldn't place, her voice sharp and sweet as broken glass, and as he stepped inside the main room, crowded with low tables and men in loose uniforms, the air felt viscous, sticky with the humidity of a dozen bodies and the damp of monsoon rain against the shutters. Takashiro's escort, Sergeant Hidemori, offered a bow stiff with discomfort and moved ahead, but the sound in the room, a strange medley of sobbing and laughter and the flat slap of a hand on flesh, made Takashiro's heart contract and send a rush of blood up his neck so fast his ears buzzed. The compound was labelled Rest House in the Kempeitai reports, and there were records enough, requisition orders, lists of names and origins, inventories of medicine and food, surrender receipts. But for the men filtering in, greased with liquor and the pallor of battle fatigue, it was just the facility, a closed world on the city's forgotten edge. Takashiro watched the faces of the soldiers seated on tatami mats, watched the officers in their pressed shirts, watched the thin, anxious women who moved between them in ill-fitting silk. Most of the women kept their eyes down, their hands curled and stiff, but some looked up with blank faces or with tiny, almost imperceptible smiles that made him shiver as though a breeze had swept beneath his skin. Hidemori announced their arrival to the overseer, a woman named Endo, whose speech was clipped and her eyes unreadable. She motioned for Takashiro to follow, and as he walked behind her into the adjacent hallway, the rooms to either side let out bursts of sound, low groans, quick gasps, the wet slip of bodies colliding in the half-darkness. Endo opened the register and recited the day's turnover in a monotone, pointing out the military quotas, the civilian guests, and the wounds or illnesses reported after assigned duty. There had been fights, she said, nervous breakdowns and suicide attempts, and she glanced at Takashiro with a look he recognized from interrogations, a silent plea for something to change, but not here, not now, not while the system churned. As Takashiro made his rounds, he tried not to look too closely at the battered edges of the cots or the stains on the floors, tried not to register the marks on the wrists or the way the younger women shrank back into shadows. But his resolve collapsed when the door to the last room opened, and a soldier, Corporal Fujikawa, emerged, shoulders hunched, face slick with tears he didn't bother to hide. The corporal moved past him without acknowledgement, and Takashiro felt it like a wound, a thing that bled but never closed. There was an odour in the room, sour and animal, and the woman lying on the cot turned her face into the wall before Takashiro could see her eyes. He took a single breath and walked out, the weight of panic settling in his chest. On his return through the corridor, the noise from the main hall had grown, punctuated by clinking bottles and shouts, some in Japanese, some in Mandarin, some in Korean, Russian, or with the rough consonants of Burmese dialect. The languages blurred together in a polyglot cacophony that made everything feel lawless and brittle. In every face, Takashiro read a mix of exhaustion and hunger, the sort of hunger that gnawed at the soul and had nothing to do with food. The men regarded the brothel with low-grade wonder and disgust, their bravado dulled by knowledge of what waited behind each paper door, the familiar ritual of selecting a number or a name from the roster, the passageways filled with silence and fear. For many the shame was bearable only because it was shared, because the system reduced everything to procedure, a document to stamp, a body to assign, a debt to erase. but shame curdled into horror when the illusion cracked, when a woman was brought in too bruised to stand, or when a man emerged retching after 20 minutes, hands shaking, muttering, "Never again," and meaning it in the way that only the truly broken mean it. Some soldiers joked, inventing stories about the girls or about themselves, turning misery into a currency for survival. But even jokes died quickly. The truth was too heavy, too obvious, its edge honed by repetition. Takashiro watched Hidemori stare at the roster that had just been updated and wondered how many men in the room wished to be transferred out, how many were thinking of mothers or sisters or the village homes they'd left behind for a flag that now stained everything they touched. The rumours had spread long before Takashiro arrived, of comfort women, of transport trains full of girls from Korea and Manchuria and Java, of pay registers signed with false names and birth dates, of whisper campaigns among junior officers who insisted that the system was pragmatic or necessary, or even merciful compared to what would happen without it. But rumours, once given voice, did not stay contained. Outside the compound, in the city's districts, in the rice paddies and on the supply trains, word spread, stories of sickness, of disappearances, of women who fought and lost, of men sent to the facility for punishment or reward depending on the whim of command. In the barracks, the tales warped into legend. Some claimed the brothels were filled with spies, and others insisted you could catch ghosts there, the souls of dead soldiers drifting in the lantern light to claim revenge on the living. Commanders collected reports and ignored most of them, preferring to delegate responsibility to subordinates already overwhelmed by chaos and shortages. In whispers, men spoke of officers transferred for speaking out, of sergeants found dead after nights in the city's shadows, their blood pooled in alleys while the paperwork listed accident or suicide in neat handwriting. A few tried to avoid the brothels altogether, but command pressure, rest quotas, and the force of habit proved stronger than most intentions. The comfort system became an open secret, a routine as much a part of military life as forced marches or weapons inspections. Takashiro wrote his report that night with hands that shook, detailing nothing out of the ordinary, signing off in triplicate, trusting that his discomfort would remain hidden amid statistics and jargon. He tried to sleep, but every sound from the corridor opened a wound. Every voice seemed to say something he didn't want to hear. As the war ground on and transfer orders accelerated, the compound swelled, then emptied, then refilled. Women left, women arrived, names vanished and reappeared, records erased and rewritten until nothing felt stable, nothing endurable. Takashiro was transferred 3 weeks later, sent north into the Burmese hinterlands, but the sounds and images followed him, shadows in the jungle mist, faces in the dark, bruises blooming like flowers in memory. The war ended without ceremony for most. Surrender arrived as an anticlimax. The compounds were shuttered or abandoned, their secrets scattered. But Takashiro, older, pale and haunted, would sometimes remember the thick heat and the singing woman, the laughter that sounded like grief, the lanterns flickering in the humid dark. In the silence of peacetime, memories came back with a clarity that refused to dull, and every night he lay in bed listening for footsteps, for a voice, for that low broken tune that marked the world as irreparably wounded. One field report among thousands, never filed, always present, a war that never stopped waiting in the rooms behind paper doors.